Hello everybody, it's Dylan Milks here for Sunday, December the 16th, 2012. Now today I want to talk about the shooting incident at the elementary school in Connecticut. Over the last 2 days, I'm sure, as most of us have, we've all been kind of getting, informed about this through the various news organizations, newspapers, this or that. And as I've been kind of listening to some of the news broadcasts and reading some articles online about this, I find that there's a lot of angles of the story which I feel are incredibly important to investigate, which really, for the most part, are not getting any attention at all. And so the purpose of this video is to bring up about 5 issues which I think should be investigated or looked at as being the root cause of this tragedy. Now, of course, everybody in the US and around the world immediately talks about the gun issues and the gun laws in the US. Now, my understanding is that Connecticut has much stricter and tougher gun laws as it is today compared to many other states. So because this has been a focus of the mainstream media, the gun laws issue, the issues of the gun law, I'm simply going to glance over it because, again, I feel that the focus has been solely on that issue, and I would like to raise a few points regarding other issues which I feel should be discussed because I believe that they may or may not be relevant to the root cause of this problem. The first thing that I want to bring up was in this whole, as I was reading, the one thing that's never mentioned is the father. So the question I asked myself is, where is the father in all this? We know that the 20-year-old young man lived with his mother, but there's no mention of a father in the picture. So to me, that right there, again, I'm not saying was the problem, but it at least raises some questions as to, was this a deadbeat dad who just left the family? Was this a dad who really doesn't even know his son, doesn't take an interest in his life? Or, maybe this was a situation where the father had passed away and, which of course would have caused tremendous hardships on the mother and the son had that been the case. The point being is that the question, where is the father in all this, is never asked. And whether he had passed away or whether he was a deadbeat, either way, the way I see it, that's not going to be a normal, healthy household. And again, that's going to be a stressful, traumatic household because of the lack of, or because of the absence of the father. Again, for whatever reason, either way, it's going to be it's going to be a less than ideal situation. Number two, what I've read and heard is that this young man he had some mental illness. Some sources I've read said mild autism. So the question I asked myself related to that is, related to the medication. Was he on medication? Maybe he wasn't. Should he have been on medication? Was he on the right type of medication? Was he on the right dose? To me, that whole issue surrounding his mental illness and his medication or lack thereof, to me, again, very little discussion of that at all in this whole context of this tragedy. The third thing, which really is getting very little discussion on, is the fact that I had heard and read recently that he was pretty much a loner. He really had very little social interaction with anybody, no friends, no social interaction with the outside world. So to me, this in itself should throw off red flags because, of course, if we look at these tragedies that have gone on the last number of years in the US and even elsewhere in the world, the majority of them really take place or are perpetuated by individuals who really are loners, really who don't have many friends or any friends, who don't have any social interaction outside the walls of their home. And to me, this, I think, speaks volumes, I think, about the state of our society. You know, really, neighbors no longer know each other. People don't know who their neighbors are. They don't know who their coworkers are. They don't really interact with people outside of their, you know, their whatever their agenda is or that they have to do for the day. They don't really go beyond that to get to know people or to find out about people and their lives at all. And so to me, that's an issue that I think, you know, again, not really discussed at all during the aftermath of this incident. Now, the other thing, which is partially related to this, is the fact that the mainstream media, I think, is a huge problem in all this. Because if you've watched the news at all, Canadian news, American news, online news, whatever, the whole entire focus of the 24-hour news cycle has been on this incident. And in my mind, that's a problem because, you know, anybody who's craving attention, who wants to be famous, who wants to be known, knows that if they go out and do a horrific, disgusting act like this, that their name will be on the mainstream, will be on the news for weeks and weeks on end, and they will in some ways be famous. Of course, in a negative way, but nonetheless, they will be famous. And the media will just continue to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, basically now for the next, you know, weeks and months ahead. Will continue to make this the main topic of all the news broadcasts, and thus creating this 24/7 culture of negative news. So I think that's something which I think is a real problem and which has to be called out and addressed, and ideally it really should be changed. The fourth thing I wanted to bring up, which I think to me is a question which I asked myself about this young man, was what are his habits? What does he spend his time on? Because if, again, I'm speculating here, but if this is true that he was a loner, doesn't really have any friends or any people who care about him, you know, my guess is that he's probably somebody who spends a lot of time online playing first-person shooter video games, and, you know, spends a lot of time wrapped up in that fantasy world of violence. And to me, if you look at our culture and the media, the culture in terms of movies and video games, you know, anybody who continues to inundate their eyes and their brain with this kind of violent material, to think that that's going to have absolutely no impact on their behavior at some point in their life, I think is completely dreaming. So again, this is really not something that I've heard or read in terms of looking at this story from that particular angle about, again, what did this young man spend his time on? What were his habits? What was he doing with his life? That's really an issue which I think should be discussed. The fifth thing which I wanted to bring up was the question of why was the single mother, why did she have, my understanding was several automatic weapons in her home. Now, I can understand the desire to protect the home. I can understand the desire to have some form of self-defense. You know, a couple pistols, I think, you know, would be understandable. But to have semi-automatic weapons in her home, in my opinion, raises some really serious questions about, you know, what was going on there. Was she maybe afraid of something? Was she threatened by, had somebody threatened her and she felt that she needed to go out and purchase these semi-automatic weapons? You know, maybe she had been in some very bad relationships where, you know, where the guy in the picture had threatened her, or she felt really in danger of her life. You know, maybe she was in some altercation one time at a gas station where somebody threatened her life. I don't know. But again, the point of this, what I'm saying here, is that those are questions that the mainstream media is not really asking. And to me, in my opinion, those are questions that really warrant further investigation into, you know, into this whole incident. Because again, these 5 points here, these 5 questions or areas of questions that I've raised here, I think those are completely fair and legitimate questions to be asking in the aftermath of a tragedy of this magnitude, especially one that involves children. Now, again, to solely focus on the gun issue, obviously there's going to be debate about the gun issues whenever a tragedy like this happens. I understand that. I get it. But to me, I think we need to peel back the layers a bit and look at the foundational issues of this whole situation. And again, to summarize, number 1, where's the father in all this? Number 2, his mental illness, the medication. Was it lacking? Was it the wrong thing? That's an issue. Number 3, his lack of social interaction. He's a loner. That's an issue. Number 4, his habits. What was this young man spending his time on? What was he spending his days on? What was he doing with his life? That to me is a huge question that should be answered. Number 5, why did the mother have semi-automatic weapons in her home to begin with? Again, these are all fair questions and completely legitimate questions, which I think should be asked and should be investigated and answered. So rather than continuing to focus on the gun issue, which again, I'm not saying they can't have a debate, but what I'm saying is rather than looking at the superficial issue, let's ask the questions that reveal the core issue, the foundational issues of the situation. So thanks for watching, everybody. I really wanted to get that out there because, again, I think that there's a lot of questions that aren't being asked about this situation. Wanted to just throw those five points out there. So let me know what you think. Feel free to comment whether you agree or disagree with me. Either way, I welcome your feedback. And thanks for watching, and have yourselves a great night. And we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.